Rain was coming down in sheets across Chicago's Magnificent Mile when Sofia Reyes stepped out of the agency van and looked up at the Moretti building for the first time. 47 stories of black glass and steel. The kind of building where the lobby cost more to maintain than most people earned in a year. She adjusted the strap of her grey cleaning uniform, tucked her ID badge into her breast pocket, and told herself this was just another shift. She had told herself that 3 times already today. She had not believed it once. What you need to understand about Sofia Reyes is that she had spent 6 years training to save lives. She knew how to read distress in a creature that couldn't speak, how to diagnose the unseen, how to stay completely still when everything around her was falling apart. She was not, by any definition, a woman who frightened easily. But the moment she stepped off the service elevator on the 47th floor and the doors of that penthouse swung open, she understood, in the space of one breath, that she had walked into something that had nothing to do with cleaning. The man at the head of the mahogany table did not look up immediately. He didn't need to. 6 guards in dark suits had already moved, hands going to weapons before she had fully crossed the threshold. The room smelled of cigar smoke and power and something expensive she couldn't name. Rain hammered the floor to ceiling windows behind him. The entire city of Chicago lay 47 floors below like a circuit board lit up in the dark. Then he looked up. His eyes moved to her left wrist, to the thin pale scar that ran 3 inches along the inside of her forearm, from the base of her thumb to the soft of her wrist. She had stopped noticing it years ago. It had become as much a part of her as her own name. Dante Moretti noticed it. Something moved across his face, not fear, not quite recognition, but a calculation so complete and so rapid that the men in the room felt the shift before they understood it. His right hand rose from the table. 1 finger. That was all. The 6 weapons went down. What that 1 finger cost him to raise, what he had seen in that scar, and why it had changed everything in the space of a single second, is where this story begins. 3 days earlier, Sofia Reyes had been a licensed veterinarian with a caseload of 23 animals and a salary that barely covered the minimum payment on her student loans. The clinic where she had worked for 4 years had closed on a Tuesday morning without warning. A padlock on the door, a 2-line notice from the property management company slipped under the break room door. No severance, no forwarding contact for the owner who had simply ceased to exist as far as anyone could tell. She had $2,340 in her checking account. Her father owed $47,000 in hospital bills from the hit and run that had put him in a coma 8 weeks ago. The driver had never been found. The police had called it a random incident, closed the file in 11 days, and stopped returning her calls. Her apartment lease renewal was in 30 days. The cleaning agency had been the only same-day placement available. She took it without reading the assignment details. She needed the $180 shift rate, and she needed it before she let herself think too clearly about what she had been reduced to. She did not know, when she signed the intake form at 7:15 that morning, that the agency held a service contract for one specific address on the Magnificent Mile. She did not know that the penthouse on the 47th floor belonged to a man whose name moved through certain parts of Chicago the way a storm front moved across Lake Michigan. Quietly, at first, gathering everything to itself, and then all at once. Before she left her apartment, Sofia had reached into the bottom of her father's old service bag, the one she kept under her bed, the one she had never thrown away, and taken out the tactical pen he had given her on her 18th birthday. Black aluminum. Weighted at the tip. Designed, he had told her, as a tool and nothing more. She slipped it into the breast pocket of her uniform without thought. She always did. It was reflex, a daughter's instinct, the last piece of her father she could still carry. She did not think about what it had been built for. Not then. The last time she had gone somewhere she didn't know and come out changed, she had been 12 years old and her father had been standing at the end of a training mat with his arms crossed and a look on his face that meant they were not done yet. That had been a long time ago. She was a veterinarian now, and there was no reason, none she could see, why any of it would ever matter again. She was wrong about that. She had been wrong about it for 6 years. In a different building, 11 minutes north, Dante Moretti was ending a conversation that was not going well. The man across the table from him was sweating through a $4,200 suit and choosing his words the way a man chooses footholds on loose ground, slowly, testing each one before committing weight. Dante let him choose. He had time. He always had time. It was the only currency in any room he occupied that could not be taken from him by force, and every man at that table understood this without being told. He was 42 years old. He had run Chicago's North Side for 11 years without a single loss of territory, and without raising his voice once in a formal negotiation. The Rolex Daytona on his right wrist caught the overhead light as he leaned back in his chair, one finger resting on the rim of a crystal glass he had not touched. His Brioni suit was the precise grey-blue of a winter sky over the lake. His eyes were the color of something that had stopped being warm a long time ago. Marco stood 6 feet behind his right shoulder, his underboss, ex-military, with the build of a man who had once been asked to hold a position alone for 3 days and had done it. Marco did not speak in meetings. He did not need to. His presence communicated everything that needed communicating about what happened to men who tested Dante Moretti's patience past its limits. The threat occupying tonight's meeting was the Volkov syndicate. Russian organized crime, moving south from the North Shore with money channeled through 4 separate holding companies, absorbing territory that did not belong to them with the particular confidence of people who believed no one would stop them. Dante had been watching it for 6 months. He had concluded, in the last 48 hours, that patience was finished. "We will conclude this tomorrow," he said. It was not a question. The man in the $4,200 suit nodded immediately. Dante stood, and the room stood with him, and he was already walking toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago spread out below in the rain, the lake a dark smear at the edge of everything, when the service elevator at the back of the penthouse chimed, and the doors opened, and everything in the room changed at once. She didn't understand what she had walked into until it was already too late to walk back out. The sound came first, the metallic, overlapping click of 6 weapons chambering simultaneously, a sound she had never heard outside of memory and recognized anyway, deep in the part of her that her father had trained before she was old enough to know it was training. Her body stopped. The cleaning supply bag dropped from her hand and hit the marble floor, and the impact was the only sound in the room for 1 full second. 6 Glock 19s were pointed at her. She stood in the doorway in her grey agency uniform, ID badge catching the overhead light, and she looked at the guns and then at the men holding them and then, very slowly, at the man at the head of the table who had not drawn anything, because men like him did not need to draw anything. He was looking at her wrist. Her left wrist. The scar her father had called a calibration mark, the result of the 43rd repetition of a forearm technique he had practiced with her until she stopped flinching and started anticipating. She had long since stopped seeing it. It was as invisible to her as breathing. It was not invisible to Dante Moretti. Something moved through his face. Not recognition exactly. Something faster than recognition, older than it. A calculation that landed and resolved in under a second, and changed something in the room that Sofia Reyes couldn't name. Marco took 1 step forward from his position. "Boss." 2 letters. A question that had no template. Dante raised 1 finger from the table. The 6 Glock 19s went down. The man in the $4,200 suit was already moving toward the corridor. The guards held position with the synchronized stillness of men who had learned not to ask why until they were told. The penthouse went from a room full of drawn weapons to a room with 2 people in it, rain on the windows, marble floor, the city below, and Sofia Reyes not breathing. "Close the door," Dante Moretti said. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth as the expensive scotch on the credenza, and edged with something she couldn't name and would not learn to name safely for several days yet. Marco looked at him once. 1 second of unspoken communication. Then Marco pulled the doors closed from the outside, and she was alone with the most dangerous man in Chicago, and she had no idea why he had just saved her life. He had recognized something in that scar. She understood that much. What exactly he had recognized, what connection it triggered behind those obsidian eyes, what it meant that a cleaning contractor's wrist had stopped 6 weapons from firing, she could not imagine. And not knowing was, somehow, more frightening than the guns had been. The black Mercedes G-Wagon was in the underground garage before she had finished arguing. She argued anyway. She told him she was a cleaning contractor. She told him she had 3 more assigned shifts this week and her agency would flag an incomplete. She told him that whatever he believed he knew about her, he was operating on incorrect information, and she would like her supply bag returned because the agency charged a $45 replacement fee for lost equipment. Dante Moretti listened to all of it with the patience of a man who has been told many things that were not going to change the outcome. "Get in the car," he said. She got in the car. The driver was a professional in the cleanest sense of the word, silent, focused, present only as a function. The G-Wagon moved through rain-soaked Chicago with the smooth, unhurried certainty of a vehicle that understood nothing in the city could stop it. Marco rode in the front. Dante sat beside her in the back and said nothing for 14 blocks, and the silence pressed against her with the particular weight of something that was not over. The penthouse entrance was on a private floor reached by a dedicated elevator requiring both a keycard and a palm scan. Heavy mahogany doors opened into pale marble floors where her boot soles made no sound, but her breathing did, bouncing back from the ceiling in a way that reminded her she was inside something very large and very sealed. A Persian rug, the deep red of old wine, covered the sitting room floor. The floor-to-ceiling windows on the north face of the building showed Chicago from an angle that made the entire city appear to belong to the man who lived here. He set 2 glasses of Macallan 25 on the credenza. He placed one in front of her without asking and took the other to the window and stood with his back to the room. "Your father's name," he said, "was Sergeant First Class Rafael Reyes, 75th Ranger Regiment, 3 combat tours, 8 classified operations, none of which appear in any accessible record." He did not turn around. "He worked private security for my father's organization for 4 years, starting when you were very young. He left before you were old enough to remember. He wanted a different life for his daughter. He was specific about that." Sofia's hand had stopped moving toward the glass. "He trained under a man called Vasquez," Dante continued. "Vasquez had a specific method. Forearm conditioning, dominant side, precise impact point along the inside of the wrist. It left a mark. A very specific mark." He turned. "I watched my father's best people train under Vasquez for 3 years. I know that scar the way I know my own address." "My father was a soldier," Sofia said. Her voice was steadier than the rest of her. "He did private consulting after his service. That isn't. The hit and run that put him in a coma 8 weeks ago was not random." She did not move. The marble floor was cold through the soles of her boots. The glass of Macallan 25 sat untouched in front of her, and the rain against the windows was the only sound. What Dante did not tell her yet, what he had known for 90 minutes, since the call that had arrived before she walked off the service elevator, was that the Volkov syndicate had been searching for Rafael Reyes for 16 months. That her father had been present, 19 years ago, during a transaction that the Volkovs needed erased from living memory. That the driver of the car that had run Rafael down had been identified 4 hours ago in a drainage channel near Pilsen, with 2 Volkov tattoos and a burner phone containing a photograph of the cleaning agency ID badge Sofia Reyes was wearing around her neck at this exact moment. She didn't know any of that yet. He gave her what she could use and held back what would only terrify her before she was ready. She pushed back. She demanded names, chains of events, verifiable specifics. She did not accept partial answers. She argued with precision, not with volume, and every time he thought she was finished she came back with something he hadn't anticipated her knowing how to ask. He gave her the truth in layers, the way you give altitude to someone unaccustomed to heights, gradually, with time to adjust. Each piece was specific, named, real. Her father's service record. The years of private work. The departure. The reason for the scar. By the time she reached for the Macallan 25, her hands were steady. But she did not know, yet, what her father had left inside her. She thought she was only his daughter. She did not know she was also his contingency. She did not leave. There was nowhere to go that was safe, and she understood this too clearly to pretend otherwise, and she directed the particular intensity of her frustration about it at Dante Moretti every time he appeared in a doorway, which was frequently. He watched her the way he watched everything, with total patience and the specific attention of a man who had survived 11 years in his position by never missing a detail. She was the first person in recent memory who refused to be read. She moved through his penthouse as if the marble floors and the Persian rugs and the floor-to-ceiling view of Chicago were simply the room she happened to be in, not things designed to communicate something about the man who owned them. He found this either irritating or interesting. He had not yet decided which. Their conversations were brief and charged with a current she felt every time she refused to take a step back from him. He told her to stay away from the north windows after 8 p.m. She told him she needed air. He said the glass was armored, but the principle of caution remained. She said his principle of caution was suffocating her. He looked at her for a long, flat moment and then stepped back from the window and let her stand there, and did not explain himself, and she understood that not explaining himself was how he acknowledged something he wasn't ready to say aloud. She stood at the window and looked at Chicago in the dark and felt him standing 6 feet behind her and did not turn around. On the third morning she found him at the kitchen counter at 5:17 a.m. His suit jacket was over a chair. His French cuffs were rolled to the elbow. He was reading an intelligence report with the focused, bone-level stillness of a man who had reclassified sleep as optional some years ago and adjusted. For 3 seconds, before he heard her, he looked like something other than what he was. The exhaustion was genuine, and underneath it was something that might have been worry, specifically placed and specifically about her. The moment he heard her footstep on the marble, the armor went back on. She had already seen it. Enzo was always present in those days. Dante's head of security, 8 years in the position, calm and thorough in the way of a man who had made his reliability his entire identity. He brought updates at regular intervals, confirmed perimeter checks, managed the details Dante shouldn't have to ask about twice. He was part of the room's furniture, unobtrusive and constant. If Dante trusted anyone in that penthouse completely, without the layer of calculation he applied to everything else, it was Enzo. On the 4th evening, Dante poured 2 glasses of Macallan 25 without being asked, set one beside her on the windowsill, and said, "He talked about you. Your father. He said you were going to be a doctor. He said you had his hands." "I'm a veterinarian," she said. A pause that could have held several things. "He would have found that funnier than you think," Dante said. She didn't smile. But something shifted in the room that had not been there before. On the 5th afternoon, she was sitting in the chair by the window, her father's tactical pen in her hand. She had taken it out without realizing, turning it in her fingers the way her father used to turn it when he was thinking, a muscle memory she had never noticed was hers until now. Enzo came into the sitting room with a perimeter report. She set the pen down in her lap and folded her hands over it before she understood why the instinct had arrived. It was not nerves. It felt less like caution and more like the thing her body knew that her mind hadn't caught up with yet. She would understand it later. On the 6th evening, the rain came back. Dante was talking. Something about her father's last known communication with the Moretti organization. Something about a document that may or may not still exist. His voice had dropped to the register it reached when the room was quiet, and he had stopped performing control and was simply using it. She turned from the window to respond and found him closer than she had understood him to be. The words left her. He did not step back. Neither did she. The city was 47 floors below them, and the room was dark except for the light coming off the skyline, and it smelled of Tom Ford oud wood and rain and the particular charged stillness that comes when 2 people are standing too close and both know it and neither has decided yet what to do with that knowledge. His hand lifted from his side. Slowly. Deliberately. The way everything he did was deliberate. His fingertips moved toward her jaw, not quickly. Nothing about him was quick, but with a certainty that made the air in the room thin. She did not move. She did not breathe. His hand was 1 inch from her face, and the whole penthouse had gone completely quiet, and she could feel her own pulse in the tips of her fingers. His phone rang. He stepped back in a single motion. Looked at the screen. And the man she had seen for 6 seconds, the one who had reached for her, who had been, for one suspended breath, something other than armored, was gone. What stood in front of her now was the other version, cold and focused and already moving. "There's been an incident at the docks." Marco's voice through the phone was flat and fast. "The Volkovs hit the shipping container at berth 14. They're asking for you personally." Dante looked at her once. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes moved to her wrist, the scar, in the way they always did when he was computing something he hadn't resolved. "Enzo stays. Do not open the exterior doors for anyone." He was already walking. "I'll be back in 40 minutes. She watched the mahogany doors close behind him. She did not know that the incident at berth 14 did not exist. She did not know that the call had been placed from a prepaid phone in a parking structure 4 blocks away by a man who had been paid $450,000 to make sure Dante Moretti was not in this building for the next 35 minutes. She had 6 minutes before she would need everything her father had given her. The penthouse went quiet. Enzo stood near the entrance corridor, hands clasped, face forward. Sofia sat in the leather chair by the window and looked at the rain on the glass and thought about a hand 1 inch from her face and told herself it didn't matter. 4 minutes passed. Then Enzo's posture changed. It was a small shift, a degree of stillness that moved from professional to something else entirely, the kind she recognized from years of watching creatures who were deciding whether to act. She had spent 6 years reading bodies that couldn't speak. She read this one in under a second. She kept her eyes on the window. Her hands stayed in her lap. She heard him walk toward her. She heard him stop 6 feet back. "I need you to stand up," he said. His voice was exactly what it had always been. That, somehow, was the worst part. Why? she said. $450,000, Enzo said. Wired to an account in Zurich at 7:43 this morning. The Volkovs compensate reliably for reliable work. He reached into his jacket and drew the SIG Sauer P226 from its custom holster with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had done it thousands of times. Their contact is in the parking structure on level B2. I have 31 minutes to deliver you before he leaves. The call about berth 14 was mine. He'll figure that out in 20 minutes. Possibly 25. He gestured with the weapon toward the corridor. There's no reason for this to be difficult. Sofia stood up. She let her hand shake. She let her breathing go audible and uneven, and she looked at the gun and then at his face, and she let everything she was performing read exactly like what he expected from a woman who was a veterinarian from a cleaning agency who had never been in a room with a man holding a drawn weapon. Her father had spent 43 Saturday mornings teaching her to perform fear. The 44th Saturday, he had taught her what to do while performing it. She pressed her right hand flat against her chest, against the breast pocket of the grey agency uniform, against the black aluminum weight of the tactical pen she had reached for every single day for 8 years without ever asking herself why. She was asking herself now. Enzo moved toward her. 5 feet. 4. At 3 feet she understood that this was the moment, that her father had described this exact geometry on an afternoon when she was 16 years old and she had thought he was being dramatic, that every single thing he had made her practice had been in service of a situation he had known, with the specific knowledge of a man who understood what world he had come from, might one day arrive. At 2 feet, Enzo made his mistake. He saw a shaking hand pressed her chest and assumed it was fear, and fear meant compliance, and he lowered the SIG Sauer by 4 inches because he needed his free hand to open the corridor door. Her right hand closed around the tactical pen with the grip her father had drilled into her 312 times before she turned 18. She drove the weighted aluminum tip into the radial nerve of his gun hand, the cluster 2 inches above the wrist, the target her father had called the quiet stop. The SIG Sauer left Enzo's hand before his nervous system had processed the signal to hold it. It hit the Persian rug with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. She pivoted left. Her elbow connected with his jaw, same motion, same angle, same follow-through from the same Saturday mornings that had once seemed excessive and now seemed precisely calibrated. He went sideways. Her right knee drove into his solar plexus before he recovered his footing, and he went down onto the Persian rug beside his own weapon and stayed there. She was breathing evenly. She stripped the cable from his communications earpiece with 2 motions. Her father had shown her the technique using shoelace, rubber tubing, and electrical cord over 3 separate sessions, because he had believed in redundancy, and had Enzo's wrist secured behind him before he had finished understanding what his body had just experienced. She picked up the SIG Sauer from the rug. She checked the chamber, left hand, specific angle, thumb confirming the safety, and set it on the side table 6 feet from him, well outside any range that involved his bound hands. She stood up straight. She looked at Enzo on the floor of Dante Moretti's penthouse, and she looked at the cable around his wrists, and she looked at the tactical pen in her right hand, and she let herself feel the thing she recognized from the end of every training session her father had ever called complete. The particular calm of a contingency that had worked exactly as designed. "My father," Sofia said, and her voice was level, completely and genuinely level, because she was not performing now, did not raise a victim. He raised a contingency plan. She wasn't the cleaning contractor who had stepped off a service elevator 6 days ago. She was a weapon her father had spent 6 years building and then hidden inside an ordinary life, waiting for exactly this room, this man, this moment to arrive. Everything she had carried, every Saturday morning, every training session she had outgrown before she understood what it was for, every year of ordinary life lived on top of an extraordinary foundation, had been waiting for this. Not for someone to save her. For the right moment to save herself. The mahogany doors opened. Dante Moretti stood in the threshold. He had been gone 18 minutes. He had figured it out faster than Enzo had planned, the way men who survived by never trusting completely always eventually figured things out. He took in the room in the way he took in every room, complete, immediate, cataloguing everything in sequence. Enzo on the Persian rug. Wrists bound with his own earpiece cable. The SIG Sauer on the side table, positioned with deliberate precision. The tactical pen in Sofia's right hand. Sofia herself, standing in the center of the room, breathing steadily, in complete control of a situation that had been designed to remove her from the building in pieces. He did not speak. The thing that moved through his face was not anger. It was not confusion. It was something that had no name in the vocabulary of a man who had spent 11 years being the most dangerous presence in any room he entered. He stood in the doorway and he looked at her and he saw her, for the first time, exactly as she was. The Volkov contact on level B2 did not leave the parking structure. The syndicate controller who had issued the contract operated out of a purchased property in Evanston and did not see the end of that night. Dante coordinated the final operation from the penthouse while Sofia sat at the window and listened to the city settle. And by 4 in the morning the threat that had been narrowing around her and her father for 8 weeks had been dismantled with the clean efficiency of an organization that did not do things halfway. Marco delivered the report in 3 sentences. Dante acknowledged it in 1 word. The driver who had put Sofia Reyes in a coma was found in Waukegan before sunrise. He had a name. He no longer had choices. The hospital account balance, $47,000 in outstanding charges across 11 weeks of critical care, cleared by wire transfer before 8 a.m. Sofia found out 3 days later, and they had the most friction-charged conversation they had yet managed, which was a meaningful bar, and she did not make him take it back, though she made certain he understood she was not finished having opinions about it. The penthouse was quiet in the hour before dawn broke over the lake. Sofia stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows. Chicago was dark and rain washed below her, the lights of the city smaller and softer after the storm, the lake invisible at the edge of everything. She heard him cross the room. She had learned the specific rhythm of how he moved. In 6 days, the way you learn the particular sound of something that has been present long enough to become a reference point. And she did not turn around until he was close enough that turning was a choice, not a reflex. His hands came up and framed her face, and she let them. He smelled of Tom Ford oud wood and rain and the cold that follows a city being reminded who runs it. It was the same scent from the first time he had been close enough to touch her, in a darkened room with rain on the glass and the whole conversation still ahead of them, and the fact that it was unchanged was the most honest thing he had offered her yet. "My father would have liked this," she said. "My father," Dante said quietly, "would have been terrified of you." A pause in which the city breathed below them. "I am. Marginally." She did not smile. But she did not look away either, and she let the space between them close, and outside the rain kept falling on Chicago in the particular way it falls when something has ended and something else has not yet decided what to name itself. 17 days later, Sofia Reyes walked into a Moretti organization security briefing in a charcoal blazer and took a seat at the conference table. She had a title that appeared on no public-facing document, and a role that would not have been intuitive to anyone who had met her in a grey cleaning uniform. She was in charge of internal security intelligence, the systems designed to ensure that trust was never again used as the specific weapon it had been used as, that no one inside the organization would ever again be able to look at a woman and see only what they had expected to see. She set her notes on the table. She set the black aluminum tactical pen beside them, in the particular way of a person who has stopped keeping something as a secret and started keeping it as a statement. No one asked about it. They already knew what it meant. Dante watched her from the head of the table with the expression that still had no name in his usual operating vocabulary, and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said, because the woman who had stepped off a service elevator in a grey agency uniform 6 weeks ago had not, it turned out, wandered into the wrong building. She had walked into exactly the right one. The cleaning agency's file still listed Sofia Reyes as a one-time placement. No one had updated it. They had no idea she had cleaned up far more than a penthouse that night. She walked into that building carrying $2,340 in her account, a grey uniform, and a tactical pen she carried out of habit. She walked out of it as exactly what her father had always known she was, and exactly what Dante Moretti had needed, without knowing it, for 11 years. Did she make the right choice, stepping into his world? Or had his world always been, in some way she couldn't have named before that night, exactly where she was always going to end up? If this story gripped you, hit that like button and drop your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing which moment got you. Subscribe and ring the bell. New stories drop regularly, and you do not want to miss what comes next.